Happy Monday, Sam. How are you?
Oh, it feels like a happy Monday there, Calen.
Does it? I don't know that you're telling the truth.
Okay, it feels like a Monday, and I feel like my neck is sorely sunburned, as well as my arms and the backs of my legs from being out in the garden, getting my vegetable patch
making me
ready
jealous.
and
You're
getting
always
my
talking
chicken.
about this garden.
Yeah, well, I've spent the last month in my garden, I think, and this last 2 weeks have been really rewarding.
Do you have the chickens yet?
No, I called for some on the weekend, but they're hard to get a hold of right now.
What?
I've got
they just
chickens
show up
coming.
themselves, or
Well, I'm gonna have to poach some chickens from my neighbors. Maybe, I don't know. I've got the coop ready, and I want the eggs, so I'm sure my neighbors will have a couple for me.
Oh, I bet. How
about you? What do you get up to this weekend?
It was pretty easy. Just a little puttering around the yard as well. Yeah, not too much. Just try to use my weekends just to kind of regroup and you know, obviously with all the stuff that's going on, it's fairly busy, but I think it's important to take that time just to shut stuff off. You can't fix all the problems every day, so just sometimes you just gotta shut her down, and so I do that on the weekends now, which I wasn't always doing. I was, you find yourself day 30, day 40, day 50 without a break, but I make sure I usually take the weekends off now.
I think it's really important to have a couple of days off throughout the week. I'm really working towards taking Saturday, Sunday, and Wednesdays off. I want to break up my week like that, so I only work 2 days in a row ever.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
I think it's very French, and I think it's very civilized,
Yeah.
and it feels like the right thing to do, but I still got to work on that. I did take a couple moments out last night with my wife in our deck chairs out on the freshly cut lawn, looking at all our work that we've both been doing, and those are the moments that we work for. Really,
you get to feel proud and you're satisfied that you accomplished something, and
Absolutely.
you see the results of all your hard work, which is one of the the things being in the hospitality industry and having businesses is getting the joy of seeing accomplishments of achievements and seeing other people enjoy the stuff that you do as well. So
it's true, and you do have to sit back and you have to make that time. Otherwise,
you got to take it. No one's giving it to you.
Yeah, it's going to
go right by. No one is going to give it to you. All right, so
Speaking
today,
of people who work hard.
Yeah,
we got a couple hard workers here today.
We do. We're super excited to talk to David Lang of the Camosun Culinary program at Camosun College, and we've got Chef Robert Belcham from Vancouver, and he's got a world of experience, and looking forward to hearing from them. Welcome, guys. How are you?
Good morning.
Great. Still figuring out the mute button.
As long as you're wearing clothes, Dave, we're okay.
Yeah.
Well, I am. The top half.
Pants are optional.
Robert, how are you?
Yeah.
Doing great. Thanks for having me on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time, for sure. It's you boys are doing it for us, not the other way around. So why don't we start with Robert? Why don't you give us a little bit of a background of where you've been and what's happened and how you started and all those things? In 2 minutes.
Notes version. Yeah. I mean, I've been cooking for 25 years. Started actually in Victoria. I love Victoria. It's one of my favorite cities in Canada.
Did you grow up here, Dave? Or sorry, Robert? Did you grow up here?
No, I didn't. I just went to culinary school there.
Okay.
I grew up in Edmonton, Alberta, actually, and Peace River, Northern Alberta, both those places. I've been cooking for 25 years. I've worked all up and down the West Coast, Victoria, California, Napa Valley, back up to Vancouver, when my son was born in 2002, and I've been working in Vancouver ever since. I've had opened and closed a plethora of restaurants over that time. Right now, currently have Popina and Popina Cantina, both on Granville Island, and doing a lot of other interesting things. Being part of the Chef's Table Society is a big part of my life right now. We're trying to get the money together to build a culinary library and reference center for all of British Columbia, all hospitality workers within the province and Canada, I guess.
Oh, fantastic.
But those people, whatever. There's always something going on.
Where would that be? That sounds like something that would go great on Granville Island.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we've been trying to work out with Granville Island for coming on 4 years now. But Granville Island it's an amazing place, and the people who work there are great. But there is, since it's a government-run organization, there is a plethora of red tape, and the government works at a snail's pace, unfortunately. So we're trying, and we're trying to find a space. We've talked to a bunch of different developers trying to find just the perfect location. It's difficult, land is expensive, rent is expensive here in Vancouver, as it is in everywhere in BC.
Is that kind of project would that kind of project go well at like the Emily Carr Institute? Would they have some room in there?
Well, this is where we first proposed to do it on Granville Island, is the old Emily Carr space. Like Emily Carr moved their campus from Granville Island to their new campus on West 6th.
Right.
And like a couple of years ago, and the Arts Club Theater took over half of the space of the old Emily Carr space, and we were looking at 4,000 square feet within the Waterside campus side of the old Emily Carr space, which used to be an old art gallery. And there's a lot of benefits to it, but there's a massive amount of capital cost just with the infrastructure, bringing it up to code, because nothing in that building has been up to code since the 70s. So there's millions and millions of dollars that need to be spent there before we can even think about putting something in there. And that's one of the problems with Granville Island, is most of those buildings were built in the 50s and 60s to build ships and to fix ships and things like that. And they haven't really been that, they're not up to snuff when it comes to Vancouver code now. Like, just, it doesn't work. So hopefully we can find some money to make it happen somewhere. It's just, it's millions of dollars, and we're just, 12 chefs on a board trying to figure out how to make this thing work. So.
Well, I think determination can get that done, but obviously it's important to have a partner that has some real estate or some pockets to, maybe some philanthropy or something. But I think it's an important thing to keep trying.
That's what well, absolutely. And I keep on telling everybody on the board that I'm not leaving the board until we actually get this thing built. So I think they'll want to get it done.
That's incentive, eh?
Just to get me off the board.
Okay, how can we get rid of them? Okay, let's do it.
Yeah. So it only cost us $4.5 million, but Robert will not be at our next meeting.
Exactly. There'll be a very good day when that happens. We haven't. It's taken a long time to get our ducks in a row just to get to this point, and we have a lot of one of the big things we were going to try to do to raise money was doing an event last summer called Cooks Camp up in Pemberton. And there was a massive amount of energy put into that, but COVID, obviously, like everything, canceled it. And it was going to be a 2-day event for cooks and chefs and all hospitality workers, with lots of different types of things to try to help a cook along on their journey, is from just a simple cook to a chef. But obviously, it got closed down because of COVID, and now we're going to do the same thing again virtually this year in September. It'll be a much smaller type of conference. And then for 2022, we're going to be doing the big one, or try to do the big one again, if everything works out, if there's not another pandemic or, another asteroid hits the earth or something like that.
I don't think anybody would be surprised.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the plan. And it was going to be the major way for us to raise the seed money to get the ball rolling. We wanted to raise $100,000 during the last Cooks Camp event to make it happen. So hopefully next year we'll be able to raise that money to make it start moving forward.
Well, I think it's a fantastic, cause, and if anything we can do to help on that front, we would, help promote and spread the word. So, let us know how that develops.
Spreading the word is the number one thing. It's letting people know what our plans are to do this, and the more people who know, the better, and the more people who are advocating for it to happen, the better. We obviously have to get a lot of money from the government, and we have to find some philanthropic people and developers, and big restaurateurs who may want to pony up a little bit of money to help the hospitality industry, there's a lot of different pieces that need to be put together.
Yeah, great. So Robert Belcham, a graduate of Camosun Culinary, I guess Institute. David Lang, you're the master of disaster over there.
Yeah, I've just taken over the chair position in the past couple months here, so lots of fun during COVID times.
How's that going? What were you doing before?
So before this, I was teaching. So generally over the past, I guess 10 or 11 years now, I've been teaching and doing resort work, opening restaurants, not my own, but other people's food trucks, doing some consulting on my off time. Yeah, so I'm similar to Rob. I've been cooking 25, 26 years now. Started out in Ontario at the Stratford Chef School. I've cooked all across the country, mainly in BC and in Quebec and the capital region of Canada. Yeah, everything from food trucks, catering, hotels. When my daughter was born, I shut her down and got into teaching. With consulting on this side as well. But yeah, that's kind of my journey here. And I've taught at 3 different colleges on Vancouver Island, and I've just landed here in Victoria at Camosun because, like Rob said, it is beautiful here.
Well, I think we've all been to Camosun College.
Yeah, that's where I went to school at Camosun, and Sam went to school at Camosun.
Yeah.
So we're all, Camosun alumni, I guess.
Wow, we should go for a beer after this.
We
can't.
yeah, we can't. What do you think the state, like, obviously you're in the school, like, I guess, maybe just walk us through briefly the transition from what it used to be like to what it became pre-COVID to what you think it's going to be moving forward. Challenges, obstacles, opportunities, just how you've seen the students coming in and the industry, how it's been receptive to putting those students to work or not. What is your take?
Yeah, I think from our perspective from the college, we're here to support industry. We're here to do what industry asks for the most part. Pre-COVID, we had a huge project going on to harmonize with the rest of Canada, to update what we're offering, how we offer it, and that's basically been put on hold because of COVID. Here at Camosun, as well as North Island College and Vancouver Island University, I've worked at both those places. I'm close with those people. I think we were on an upswing in enrollment. I think there was an interest for people to get back to school and into the industry. I felt like there was some sort of positivity and forward movement and all the things that we talk about at Bread and Butter. So wage equity, work equity, for both employees and business owners. And I think Robert has been one of those people, at least I've looked at in the industry, who has, created a good environment for staff and student apprentices. So yeah, I think we were on an uptick. Post the big uptick for the Olympics, there was a little bit of a lull, and then we were kind of seeing another uptick in enrollment. We kind of just got stopped dead in our tracks during COVID. It was kind of a really uncertain time for everybody, a real hit for the restaurant and food service industry. The college here, we closed down for probably a month, reorganized, went virtual, tried to create a lending library for equipment and have students do their assignments online, which was a big learning curve for us as instructors as well, although we're pretty set up here at Camosun with ePrentice. So we just kind of scrambled to try and do the best we could for students. And then we started again. So we've been face-to-face with a 50% reduction in our student numbers. So we're only doing 8 students per class.
Wow.
With social distancing. Wow. Yeah. But it's a whole lot more work. So we have to be virtual instructors. We have to do, things. We still have business to support. Just like the industry, we run a catering, a cafeteria as well as a dining room here. And there's still demand. And in fact, there's probably more demand for things like takeout and frozen meals and whatnot. but what I'm really seeing with students now is just this incredible lack of motivation, and in some cases with our younger students, just even a lack of hope. We've tried to build them up that there is hope in this industry. You get out of it what you put into it.
Yeah.
There's going to be some hard times, but that's no different than any other job. So now we're seeing a lot of, we already were seeing a lot of increased mental health demands, and I think this pandemic has only really increased that. So now we're balancing our roles as instructors as well as counselors now, it seems.
Yeah, talking people off cliffs and stuff.
Yeah. So there's a huge rate of attrition right now. Just a lot of I can't handle this right now. I've got too much going on. I'm going to come back in the fall. I'm going to re-register for 2022 when this is over. And then also getting them into industry. With our partners that we have strong relationships with that are good mentors, we have no problem. We have restaurants in town here that 100% of their staff are students. But it's that relationship between the college and industry. We can set them up with some good work habits, but it's really the partnerships that we have in industry that help us or help the students to become successful as chefs or cooks. Lots of good examples in this city for sure.
Wow.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. I know, we've had a bunch come through our restaurants, in particular Zambri's and whatnot, and I think what you're doing is a great job. And Robert's an alumni of that program. What are your thoughts on the education and the state of the employment market, Robert?
Well, the employment, it's always been a very tough industry to get into, to get anything out of, but like David said, you get out what you put in. I think that it's very difficult nowadays because there's a lot of fundamental things wrong with our industry that nobody's really talking about, and I was really hoping that people would talk about because they've had this opportunity to actually take a step back from their businesses because of COVID and then sort of reassess. But I think most people are just trying to hang on as best they possibly can, as opposed to looking at what was wrong pre-COVID. And the Bread and Butter Collective, you guys decided to take the bull by the horns and sort of start talking about that very openly, which has never really happened before. You hear about it in the walk-ins and in the kitchens and when you're having staff meal about the restaurant's paying this much or not paying enough, or no one ever gets a raise or whatever. And there's some real fundamental problems with our hospitality industry that need to be addressed to attract the best people we need and want in our industry. And until those things get addressed, like wage inequity, like no holidays, sick days, real advancement. There's so many different levels that need to be addressed before we're gonna, people are gonna either want to stay in the industry and work their way up, or even just attracting people to the industry in the first place. Wages are obviously the biggest one, and it's something that I've been advocating for a long time. Why is it that I worked for a long time to get my red seal, as an example, since talking about culinary school.
Yeah.
Not once have I ever been asked to look at my red seal. It's never been a part of me getting a job. Not once in 25 years.
Crazy when you think about it.
It is.
Yeah.
And when you look at any other trade, Camosun, from an electrician to pipe fitter to a welder to whatever, it's directly your red seals and your apprenticeship is directly tied to your wage.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's not, that doesn't happen in the culinary field at all. And that's wrong, and it needs to change. And it happens in the front of the house too. Why is it that every person or every restaurant out there pays their servers minimum wage, and they stay at minimum wage their entire career? I can't think of another industry where that happens. This is why the whole wage, the supplementing of the wage with tips, and the whole tip elephant in the room, I guess, needs to be readdressed or re-looked at and fixed. And I think abolished. I think tipping needs to be abolished because it just creates too much animosity within the kitchen or within the restaurant itself. and especially now with COVID, it's really shown that those uninsured earnings may look good pre-COVID, but they sure don't look good now.
Well, it's hard to get your full benefits if you're not claiming your full pay, and tips are
100%,
a huge part of your full pay.
Exactly. It's when a waiter is making minimum wage, but they're really pulling in $60,000 a year or $70,000 a year, that's a massive disparity, and they could be buying a condo, or they could be buying a house or something like that, but they can't because they can't get approved for a mortgage.
Well, it shows they make $20K or something instead of what they do make.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, exactly. So there's massive things that need to change within our industry, and until they do, until restaurateurs really take the bull by the horns and make changes, we're always going to have these problems.
This is a huge. Sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Dave.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think I would agree with Robert, in terms of the equity of culinary arts or cooks versus other trades. We have this Red Seal program that's tied to the ITA. What the other trades have, unfortunately, is massive unions to back them, which require these kind of trade designations. I know Gilbert was probably preaching this to you back in the day, Robert, but it's all about professionalism, and the cost of training new employees over and over again, and not training them up, but just replacing them, is incredibly costly. Yeah. And if we don't, and I'm preaching to the choir here, really, but if we don't pay people a wage that's attractive for them to stay or to advance in the industry, we're going to get what we get. And at the college here, we train students. We have great high school students. I'm always just amazed at some of our younger students, anywhere from 15 to 65. And people are here for different reasons, but we have a lot of great students that go into industry. They become disillusioned with pay structure, working conditions, so on and so forth. Not that other trades have great progressive working conditions, but I think the pay equity kind of can make up for that sometimes.
I think it definitely gets you over the hump. The pay equity, if you're working if you're starting out at minimum wage, minimum wage now is $15.20 an hour starting in June in BC, or I think it's $15.25 or something. So you're starting to get up a little bit, but I do know, you can't, a living wage in BC is $21 an hour. So, even if you factor the tip component of it, but nobody's got control of the tips. Most people aren't declaring them on their taxes, so it doesn't benefit them in real way. And it's almost like the tipping thing is almost like indentured servitude to a degree, because it keeps you, because we're transitioning some of and through the Bread and Butter Collective and just the cooperation amongst our group is just deciding that we want a strong industry. We want to make sure that the people in our working for us are making enough money to live, and that just supports a better community. So it's not just about the restaurant industry, it's about the community we're in entirely, because everybody that's working in this industry is paying rent and shopping and buying food and supporting other industry people. So it's way more important than just looking at it from just the specific business experience. And I think along with the pay inequity, it's also restaurants to some degree have been subsidizing their customers because they've been making such a small margin that, I can't imagine a restaurant that doesn't, increase their prices, but just increases their wages. It just wouldn't work. But I do think that, it's long overdue for businesses in the hospitality industry to charge what they should charge. If you're going to cook a steak at home and do all that kind of stuff, but now you're going to a restaurant and you've got all the infrastructure that's involved in that, the plates and the cutlery and the staffing and the management and the overhead, but we're literally charging what you could make your own steak for at home.
Well, so. I think of cooking a steak at home as an expensive thing to do. I got a nice piece of meat that's not cheap. Yeah. And then all the time it takes to go shopping, to come home, prepare it, to clean up after it. Yeah. If I'm charging myself out at $100 an hour,
You know.
I'd rather go out and eat and not do the dishes.
Yeah. But I think the other thing too with that is like there has to be value on both sides. So I think you can't serve and then demand big dollars and then sit on the, justify it because you're paying your employees, a living wage. I think you got to do everything. I think you got to produce a good product. You got to have, a good engaged staff. And you can't be apologetic of what you charge because obviously if you're running a business, you need to make at least a 10% profit. But we're at like historic low profit margins in any industry. It's anywhere between 1% and 5%. Majority of them losing money or just breaking even. So I think there's a couple things. As much as the wage inequality is there for sure, I think we need a bit of a reality check on what we're buying our food for and what we're selling it for, and especially with the quality. In particular, I know Vancouver, BC has tremendous restaurants, like some of the best in the world, and Victoria is over. I mean, I think we have way more, top tier restaurants per capita than most places would. I know all the places that are in our collective are just top notch. They give it every day. So I think there's, pricing is an issue too. Like, are people going to pay more for food?
I think that a big part of it too is like you said that we do have some of the best restaurants in the world. We have some of the best ingredients anywhere in the world too. Best fish, best beef, best pork. You name it. It's amazing. I feel very lucky to cook here in BC. But the other aspect of it is that there's so many restaurants and so many restaurateurs trying to figure out how to make a buck that the first thing that they tend to do, because this is what businesses have always done, is just like cut prices. So there's this massive race to the bottom.
Yeah, race to the bottom.
And,
exactly.
Undercutting each other over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And I tell the story all the time. When I first came to Vancouver after living in California, I worked at a seafood restaurant called Sea Restaurant. It was a very high-end restaurant.
I remember it well.
A sous chef there. It was a great restaurant. Robert Clark, king of sustainability. He was the chef. Perry Cambolis was the owner. And food cost wasn't a big deal for them because they were such a busy restaurant. But when we would get salmon, sockeye salmon, or every species of salmon actually, from one fisherman up in Prince Rupert, the Hawkshaws, they would literally fly the fish to us. We would butcher it. It was so fresh that we couldn't even use it for a couple of days because it was still in rigor mortis.
Yeah.
And we would charge $25 for that main course salmon. And that was in 2004, 2005. Today, not today, a year ago, or a year and a half ago at Campagnolo, when I still bought that salmon from the Hawkshaws, still got flown into me, still the same freshness, still the same quality, I could charge $26 for that salmon.
It's insane.
Wow.
12 years later, 15 years later or whatever, because that's sort of what the market was sort of selling salmon for in Vancouver. That's fucked up.
Yeah,
certainly
100%.
Not keeping pace with inflation or.
Well, none of it does.
Or...
The wages don't either. I mean, if you look in BC, I think they've done a good job at keeping, the minimum wage up, which is good. If you look to the States, where the minimum wage is around $7.25, and it's been $7.25 since 2009. So your buying power of that, like you go back to 2009 and you're really making $2 an hour in 2009 relative, right? So if you're still making $7 an hour, $7 an hour now compared to what it was in 2009, it's nothing. It's pennies.
It's a global industry, or it's a problem throughout the globe that people just don't get paid what they deserve. I know, coming from the coffee industry, that coffee is a commodity that's traded, and the commodity price hasn't really changed much in 40 years.
Yeah.
It hovers over a buck a pound for the last 40 years.
That's insane.
I would tend to disagree. I'm going to disagree with you on one point. I think that people. I wouldn't say that people don't get paid what they deserve. I don't think that that's correct. I think people get paid what they're willing to work for.
Yes.
The problem is that people aren't charging what things are really worth.
Yes.
Coffee should be worth a lot more because farmers should get paid more. Vegetables farmers should be making a living wage as well, but they're still fighting for an extra few cents per pound for squash, stuff like that. just like, restaurateurs should be charging a lot more for a main course or an appetizer, so that they can, make that 10% profit margin and then pay their people properly. There's not a product out there that doesn't do this, except for the food industry, for whatever, some bizarre
it's
reason.
Weird. Yeah.
It's like, if we want to, I think a big part of it is that we're people pleasers. We're hospitality people, and we want to make people happy. And we think that by giving them a discount or subsidize their meal, like you had said, that it's going to make them happier. And at the end of the day, it doesn't, because it just really cheapens the product.
Yeah, nobody's winning in that environment. Go ahead, Dave.
Oh, I think, similarly to Rob, I probably started out in the mid 90s in this business, and thinking back to my apprenticeship at Vineland and then in the early 2000s moving to Whistler, prices have gone down. Yeah. Like there's no luxury pricing anymore. And that, in some ways that's good, but still, if I was charging $26 for steelhead or salmon in 1997, why is it the same today? Yeah. Prices have gone up exponentially, supply's gone down. It's insane. We always used to make the comparison to what does a cup of coffee cost in Japan? It's just insane. We don't charge enough for food. We don't charge enough for prepared food. And again, it comes down to that professional piece. Dining is an experience. It's become an everyday thing for most people. Yeah. Probably people eat out more than they eat at home. That's a big generalization.
It's grown. The industry has grown for sure.
Yeah, there has to be a separation between you should pay for experience, and if that's a better burger, you pay for it. If it's a sit-down meal with a trained server, with a trained sommelier or a bartender, people should pay for it. It's not like you're watching food TV. It doesn't just happen on a screen.
Are they paying in tips, and does that bring us into the evil realm of tips?
I think that's a big part of it for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if you talk to some of the old guys, not that we're old guys yet, but I think we're getting there. I think there was an upward momentum on that. I think there was, I remember charging $52 for tenderloin. I look at that same restaurant now and it's $42. I'm like, okay, well, I think maybe tenderloins lost some popularity, but also the portion sizes are getting more reasonable. Yeah. So there's a little cost reduction, but it should still be $52 based on
everything that goes into it and the amount of money that our business needs to make, especially to absorb events like COVID and stuff that's totally out of your control. I don't know any other industry that is so ill prepared, and even from a balance sheet standpoint, where you just don't have enough retained earnings because you're literally making or breaking even. And it's like, how do you get ahead? How do you invest in stuff like a culinary library in Vancouver, and especially doing it on the backs of a restaurant industry that is, makes pennies. I'm sure there's different ways you can, big chains are doing it through real estate and other things like that. But from a pure culinary play where you're cooking, and does it have to do with passion? Is this why we're so, like, we're just passionate about the product and we put so much love into what you were doing that we're happy with this, with the peanuts that come back our way? Or is it bad business? Is it bad business management? Or what do you think the root of it is?
I think it's both. I mean, I remember going to culinary school and being so hyped about this is back in the mid 90s, so early 90s, seeing the first time I saw a Charlie Trotter book and just being so blown away by that kind of food, and then seeing stuff coming from France, and just my eyes being opened in this immense passion that I had. And that passion feeds the kitchen, and it feeds the whole restaurant. And you sort of, that all these people who are coming into the industry or trying to break into the industry, they keep on feeding that passion. They work the long hours, the extra hours, the days of unpaid or unpaid labor and all that sort of stuff. Is just because I want to learn more. I want to learn more. I want to learn more. And it all comes from the individual's passion. But that's, you can't build an industry on passion. It doesn't work that way. You have to build it upon a solid foundation of financial security, or it'll eventually go away. And that's why you see so many cooks burning out and then just going and leaving the industry completely. Yeah. Like from my graduating class in 1994 at Camosun, nobody else cooks. There's not one guy who cooks anymore, like, not except for me. Yeah. And I barely cook. Like, I don't, I'm not on the stoves or anything like that. But it just doesn't happen anymore. So it's that these young idealist cooks come into the industry thinking that they can change things, and then it's actually the money that beats them down, or the lack of money that beats them down to this.
Well, they can't support themselves, and they also see the restaurateurs
Yeah.
like, I mean, they're bouncing checks, or they're like, don't cash your paycheck, or or can you do this shift for me, or can you do me this favor, or whatever. You can't build an industry on favors and things like that, and it's sad because there is so much passion in the food industry. To see the candles get muffled over time it's pretty depressing. I know, as on the I'm obviously come from the business side of the restaurant industry. I was never a cook. I hosted at Zambri's a whole bunch of times early, and made people laugh, I guess. But yeah, so I from that perspective, but just watching it from the business side, I've always made sure that the business is like, there's no point in being in this industry for me, coming from business, if you can't make some money,
Exactly.
or at least provide a living for your family, and make sure that your staff are taken care of. I mean, that's one of the things, when frankly, with Big Wheel Burger, we try to do that from the beginning. We wanted to see if we could build a quick service restaurant that paid its staff well, could do stuff for the environment, could make some money, buy local and fresh, and those things, and just see. And it was a big experiment that has worked out. And we're not the cheapest burger by any stretch, and I don't make apologies for that, because you get good quality. But if you actually look at the perception of it, and I think this is a good example, in the burger, we have a 5-ounce burger. So the only place that's cheaper than ours per ounce of beef is McDonald's. So when you actually look at what they're serving or what you're paying, the only place that's cheaper than Big Wheel Burger for the beef is McDonald's. But yet we still have price resistance, and wow, it's an expensive burger. And we're like, okay, well, we pay a living wage, we treat our employees right with benefits, we buy good ingredients, and we care. So, and the fact of the matter is, we are really supported great. So the model can work. It's just a question of educating the industry and people that are in it to just follow those fundamentals, and not apologize for charging more, and not feeling guilty. And but you also have to provide a good product and good service and good customer service, and it's two-way street, right? It's not just the customers. But I think that having that understanding of the importance of that is so key in order to make a change. And I think that's why, we're doing what we're doing with Bread and Butter Collective, and, trying to give confidence to entrepreneurs to charge what they need to charge, not make apologies, and to build a really good team around them. But you can only do that if you can show, wage improvement. I mean, you can't have a cook making $17 an hour for the entirety of his career. It just doesn't. They can just never get ahead. So then all of a sudden they look at other opportunities, which is kind of maddening.
Well, that's what's happened for my whole career. It's just like the wages never really, went up. It's just the only reason why a wage went up for me is because I went to a different position, a higher position.
Yeah.
Not like a line cook made more money. It was just I went from a line cook to a sous chef, and then sous chef to a chef.
Yeah. And then after that, I mean, the kind of price point caps out early in the industry, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Well,
then I went.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that I went to restaurateur, and then I went back to a wage that a line cook made.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But you had control of your schedule.
Yeah, I think that's one of the real challenges, though, Robert. I can say as an educator or as a chef, there's always a path forward for you. Well, not a lot of restaurants offer that feedback. So performance reviews or wage structure or like a path forward. And the students or the cooks who are going to take the path that you and I took and other people took will advance, because we see that as a way to, take control, to do our thing, to make more money or whatever. But the reality is that we need a lot of line cooks.
Yeah.
And how do we keep, and that's exactly it, is if they're going to make $17 for 10 years. I worked for a gentleman in Whistler with Top Table early on who had a very progressive idea about wage structure. We had a line cook who was the previous chef. He was making $27 an hour as a line cook in early 2000 because he did the job of 3 people.
Yeah.
And he was that valuable. You know, wages were based on your input. There's always a path. There was always feedback. And I think that's it. You know, we're such a tight family in restaurants. There's intrinsic value, but money does, you know, pay the bills. So whether or not the chef knows your kids' names or whatever, that's always important. But again, we have to see this path forward for line cooks, and there are people that just want to be a line cook. They don't want to, but it has to be something that they can do and make a living. But I do see a lot of hope in this industry. I still am hopeful.
What?
You know, I think you were involved with the Chefs Congress in 2010, Robert. I think you were there. I was one of the organizers. You know, the Cooks Camp was really exciting. You know, it's kind of a reigniting as much as bread and butter is, and people coming together to figure out how we can do things better.
Yeah.
I keep hinting that I'm going to open a place again, but then I go back on it.
You talk to people like us and go, don't do it.
Yeah.
No,
Robert and Calen are just...
I agree with you. I think that it is it's still very positive. Like, this is the one thing about this industry that I absolutely love about it, is that because of the passion that's in it, people are very positive and they want to see positive change. And that's, I think, you know, for too long, we've been sort of resting on this idea that, you know, change will eventually come and somebody else will do it. Like, it'll be the Earls or the Cactus Club or whatever. And it's never happened in my career in 25 years. So I just said, you know, sort of, better get off the pot, you know, kind of thing. Yeah. It's like, if, you know, I've finally been able to, after so many different restaurants and, you know, teaching so many different cooks, you know, how to cook. And I just want to give back and try to figure out a way to make our industry better for the younger people coming up. And the best way to do that is actually talking about it and getting as many people talking about it as possible. And somebody's going to have the best idea. Like, the best idea will come to the top, I hope. Yeah. And then we'll all figure out a way to make it better for everybody. You know, there's like I said at the beginning, there's a lot of problems in the industry, but at the end of the day, it's the passion of our industry that makes it so positive and such a great place to work. And because you get to meet the coolest people, you get to, you know, the best part about being in the dining room or working in a restaurant is that, you know, you're there for their first dates, their anniversaries, the birthday parties, you're getting people laid, you know, there's the first drinks. It's the best thing about our industry. And we have to sort of take a step back and go, okay, we've done everything we can for our customers. Now, how do we make our employees the number one priority? And how do we make, you know, the fact that we can be here in perpetuity and a very important part of our business model as well.
Yeah, I think maybe hopefully it's the maturing of the industry. Saying that, I mean, think of how long the restaurant industry's been around. It's been around forever. But I think it's that moment in time where you're realizing, look, things can be different. And I know when COVID hit for us, it was pretty, you know, earth-shattering, just like everybody else. And immediately it was like, okay, if we're going to survive, we know what's broken, because we've known that we weren't charging enough and the food costs were too high and all those things. And we knew that our employees, you know, in order to keep them, we needed to pay them well. And I think just making that switch of just saying, well, we won't be here if we don't do this. So let's do this. That's something that we did. And I think through the Bread and Butter Collective, we're encouraging others to make those same decisions. So hopefully, you know, this conversation and these types of dialogues will encourage others to just make those somewhat tough decisions. But in the end of the day, I remember Jeff Hetherington from Pig, and he used to sell a pulled pork sandwich for $5. And I was like, dude, you need to charge $7 for that thing. It took him a year and a half to get to that point where he could even imagine charging $7. And when he did, nobody said a word one about it. They just kept buying it, and they loved it because they knew it was worth. People are going to pay what you charge. Then they're going to decide whether that money's worth the value. So put that to the test. Like, I think, you know, put that to the test, because most people, anytime that we've done price increases, no one has said boo. So I think people should trust. Hopefully, you're not taking advantage, but trust the business person or the entrepreneur to decide this is what I need to charge in order to keep the lights on. So if you want me to be here, then support me. And I think that's a pretty even exchange that, I think that's what's happening in COVID too, is people are supporting the restaurants they want to see survive. And I think that, we were in survival for as long as I've been in this industry, and I've been in this since 1999, we've been in survival mode. And I've been in other industries and worked where, no other industries like it. And, you go to Alberta and you look at the oil field and they're 30% margins and, they're just like throwing money away left, right, and center, but yet we're starving to feed people. It's insane.
It's crazy.
And the changes that need to happen, I mean, we all kind of know what those changes are, but it seems so daunting as an individual or even as a small group to try to make those changes, because it always feels like we're going against the trend or against the norm by charging more. And I'm not saying that's not the right thing to do. It is the right thing to do, and I know that. But I'm wondering what's the value of even a small group like ours? Does this need to be bigger? Does it need to be mandated by the government? You guys have any thoughts about government intervention in our industry, and if that's a positive or maybe a negative thing, perhaps?
I think it can be good, but it can also go quite wrong. I don't know if at a government level there's an intimate understanding of how restaurants operate as much as, say, Ministry of Agriculture understands the day-to-day of farmers. We've seen recently with some of the health orders, it's just like, well, obviously not a chef making these decisions. Restaurants can be adaptable, but let's not tell them at the 12th hour.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think the value of bread and butter is, okay, so I'm just going to look at it from the outside. I'm an educator now. But what I saw is a lot of restaurateurs, chefs, restaurant owners, food service professionals come together, put their cards on the table, share resources, talk about common challenges. It always comes back to tips, but we try to put that to the side. But, one of the biggest things is we can't keep undercutting each other. Again, it's not a race to the bottom.
Yeah.
Cheap is cheap. If you're getting a cheaper burger, it's a cheaper product.
Yeah.
So the consumer really has to decide, do they want to go to McDonald's twice and have that experience? Or can they accept going to Big Wheel, once or 1.5 times, whatever the difference is, and having a better experience? Cheap experience to me is not as valuable as a really good experience.
Yeah, it's a very tough question. I mean, in British Columbia, there's 14,000 restaurants. Getting 14 people to agree on one thing is an impossibility. Getting 14,000 different restaurateurs to agree on a path forward is very, very difficult, to say the least. It's one of the ideas that I had is making it a government mandate to abolish tips across Canada, just to give everybody the same sort of playing field. Abolish tips across the board, then every restaurant is on the same page, and it has to figure out how to make their business model work from that.
Yeah,
I have no idea if that would work. I'm not a politician. I don't trust politicians, and like David said, I don't really think that politicians have the best interest of business in mind, or know where we're coming from to begin with. But maybe it's something that if we as a collective, like the Bread and Butter Collective, came up with an idea that we could then propose to government, then maybe that's the way forward. I don't necessarily think unions are the best idea, because there's, like, with 14,000 different restaurants, there's too many different, not one of those business models is the same. So a union doesn't fit within every restaurant, right?
Well, I think that's a sorry to interrupt, but that, we shouldn't have to have a union in order for it to be paying fair wages or create a business model that can sustain itself. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I think I look at Amazon and I'm just like, okay, here's a company making billions and billions of dollars, off the backs of their staff for the most part. I'm sure their senior team gets paid well and they're all bonus to the hilt. Meanwhile, you hear stories of people peeing in bottles and lines and can't leave and all that stuff. And that to me is like, sure, a union movement there, that makes sense because they've given every opportunity. They've got every resource to pay properly and don't. So that industry is doing something very much different than what's happening in our industry. We're basically, getting the scraps that, and this sounds bad. Hopefully no customers listen to this podcast, but
I think only
the
mom's
scraps falling
listening
off the scraps falling off the table and thanking people for it. And I think it's just making the decision to do better. And I know that through COVID, and I want to hear a little bit about your decisions for shutting down Camosun and things like that, because when you make a decision to open and continue, like after COVID, I'm expecting at least 40% of the restaurants not to be there. So maybe we're going to have 10,000 or 8,000 that are left standing. So that should be the perfect time to just change the balance. And
it's still hard to control 8 to 10 to 14,000.
Listen, if people don't want to make good decisions for their business or good decisions for their employees, like everything I've ever heard of or read, or even I've been doing a lot of reading this last year, we're only as good as our bottom people. So that's the success of society, is how are the people living in the lower levels doing? Are they doing better than a different country or a different area? Are they doing better than did 5 or 10 years ago? Like, let's lift our people up. And that's the same thing with the restaurant industry. Let's lift our people up. Let's create an industry that we can be proud of.
And our industry is so different than other industries that can be controlled like that through unionization. I mean, we're not like the car manufacturing industry where there's like three companies.
It would kill the
14,
passion. You can't bring a union in and have the passion. It's a really tough balance, and the reason why we're here is because of the passion. We're choosing our passion over profits. And that, like Robert said earlier, that can satisfy you for a short time, but trying to build, a team of professionals. And I mean, we have a great team that works around us, and we've got tons of people that work there for a long time. And I'm proud to be paying them. I'd rather pay them first because they're the lifeblood of what's happening. And then you see how good a business you can end up with. So there's a way to do it. And I don't think it's that difficult. It's just a question of just sharing the knowledge. Right?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it, and I mean that's a big part of what David's doing too, is sharing that knowledge with the younger generations of cooks out there, a path forward that maybe can change the industry.
Yeah.
It is something that we bring up quite often is reality checks, whether it's about mental health, physical health. We talk about the fun and the sun of the restaurant industry, but it doesn't last long. There's a certain element, which I certainly was part of, that liked to party. In my older age with kids, I don't so much. But yeah, it's kind of a more holistic approach that we take to teaching. It's not just about the cooking itself. It's about business fundamentals, how you treat yourself, how you treat others. Quite often I would say it's easier to lift someone up than it is to push them down.
Yeah.
But I remember starting in this business in '95 and being physically abused by my teachers, like having to defend, like, what the hell, you can't, why are you touching me? Like, not having been in it, from a very young age, I didn't even realize that existed. And then, and me pushing back, like actually saying, no, don't touch me. Like, let's go outside. What do you want to do? Like that, even the chefs back then were like, whoa, you're standing up to me?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things that, have changed in this business. There has to be a sound business model. There has to be, and I've seen a lot of change for the better. It's really enjoyable. It's an enjoyable place to be. And a lot of people say, well, why do you cook? You must be crazy. It's hot, long hours. Well, it's because of passion.
Yeah.
That's what we'll call it, is passion. But, hopefully coming out of this pandemic, we'll have a bit of a roaring 20s effect. And, we can make the change that's necessary and also benefit from a renewed exuberance surrounding eating out, because I haven't left the island for a year and a half, and it's getting tiring. I was hopeful to go to Cook's Camp. That was the first big letdown. I'm glad to hear it's happening again. I think the future's bright here.
Yeah, I think it's a question of, we talk about passion, and people in this industry have a ton of it. Now let's put some passion in the fundamentals that are going to guarantee longevity, success, and quality of living, not just for us, but our staff, which then is a reward for community because you get this diverse, well-run businesses that, just support healthy, vibrant communities. So,
yeah. One of the things I was going to say was you had mentioned about how to make the industry better and how to make it the people want to stay in it longer. And I think what you're doing at Big Wheel is a perfect example of that. Like the restaurants that are really going to survive COVID are the restaurants that change their business model through this, and start paying a living wage and treating their people properly and treating their people the way they do in other industries, as opposed to just a commodity, something that comes in and goes out, and treating them like family, because that's really fundamentally what the whole business is about. It's about the people who are your front facing towards your customer. It's the whole package, and it's all about the people who are working for you. And if they aren't happy, then nobody's selling, and your business.
Well, it's hard to attract staff, and I mean, if you build it, they will come, and they'll tell their friends, and you just create this solid shelf of stability where people know. And we have people that come and go of our staff, but a lot of them will come back because they know they get treated well, and so that will expand the market of people that want to get into the industry. If you have, instead of having maybe a handful of restaurants that have this philosophy, having hundreds of restaurants with this philosophy, then you'll actually grow the base. And then having good institutions like the at Camosun College, and where you start, and that's where you get them. They're just wide-eyed and ready to put their passion in, and then shortly thereafter they get a job in the restaurant industry and get crushed. It'd be really nice to just have a soft landing spot for them where they can really explore their passion and their uniqueness. I mean, there's so much potential with the ingredients, like Robert said earlier, in this province. And and we are a pretty progressive province, so we should be able to push the envelope when it comes to creating that balance where you can actually put the passion in, make a profit. And we're not talking a ton of profit, but a small profit, but then supporting others who then can go and create their future just like you did, right? Like you not only were a chef, but you actually became an entrepreneur, and now you're business building, right? And as much as you've gone through different iterations of that, you're still standing. And I think that's
limping but standing.
Well, this is it. I mean, 25 years, and same with David. I mean, this industry takes its toll on people for many different reasons. But I think when you're still here doing it, and you're also really trying to help others and try to be creative. Like, it's a really unique thing to cancel tips. Like, we battled with this at the Bread and Butter Collective, discussing what our positions are on it, and it's just one of those things that you just can't, like, it's almost too big of a challenge as far as trying to figure out the best way forward. But I think we need to set that aside and then just focus on paying and charging and creating a business fundamentals that can actually support our staff well, regardless of the tips. Right? Like, they should be able to look at their NOA at the end of the year and say, hey, I earned X, and now I can support myself without having to live with 6 people. And especially if you're not living at home. Obviously, if you're living at home and have the family support, that's great. But if you're 25, 26, 28, getting married, having kids, you cannot work in most restaurants and survive.
No, it's not really possible.
Yeah. Which is hopefully
what
we're going to change.
And I would have to disagree with you about the tips. I think the tips thing it's fundamental to the change in this whole industry. Unless the chip model structure changes,
we're still in the same spot. Is that your view?
Yeah, I mean, and I've done it. I have my own podcast, and I've done a lot of talking to different chefs around the country. Just had a podcast with Todd Perrin and Richmond Station. Sorry, Todd Perrin from Mallet Cottage, and chef from Richmond Station, Amanda from Dirt Candy in New York. They've all gone to the no-tip model, or started with the no-tip model. And if they pay their staff properly, living wages,
Yeah.
then it works.
Yeah.
It works really well. And the customers, it doesn't really affect the customer base too much. There's always going to be people who complain about money.
Yeah.
Always. It's never it doesn't matter if you're paying tips or doing tips or not tips.
Yeah.
People will complain because that's the business. But it's fundamentally, if your staff is happy, like you talked about before, then, and making the money that they should do to pay their bills, then telling the story about why we don't pay tip, or you don't have to tip at the end of your meal, it's not that big of a deal anymore.
Well, and I think people are going to complain no matter what. I think that most people come into their meal, they already know what they're going to tip at the end of it. I think for the most part.
Yeah, they have their.
You know, they've got an
base
idea
range.
or a maximum they're going to go, and does it
absolutely.
really reflect what it's supposed to, like good service, or can that just be baked into the formula and the prices?
Well, I think that's what
that's
they
the
do,
idea,
right,
right?
Robert? Like that's how they're doing it. They obviously they've fixed their pricing model to afford to pay the living wages.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what they did. So I mean, every place is a little bit different because everybody has a different business model. Like Todd, it was really interesting listening to Todd because he's a good old boy, and Todd is like salt of the earth. From Kitty Vitty, he's like accent, the little jaunty toque, the whole deal. A beautiful man, but he's like, he decided we just changed everybody's wage to $20.
Yeah.
It's more than living wage here in St. John's, and from the dishwashers to the chef, everybody gets paid $20. And everybody was super stoked. Like every waiter, every porter, every dishwasher, everybody got paid $20 an hour. Now the chef and the sous chefs and the managers, they're compensated in other ways as well. But when it comes to actual cash, that's what they did, and they adjusted their pricing. They put it on the menu that there's no longer you no longer need to tip, and right now it's working. It's middle of COVID. The business model is working for them. They don't know what it's going to be like in a year when hopefully this is all over, but it's working for them, and it's working well.
It's a good time to make those kinds of transitions, I think, through COVID.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as soon as COVID hit, I changed our tip model immediately.
Yeah.
And I asked my employees, but I only asked because I was being courteous, I think. I was going to do it anyway. I just pooled everyone's tips from the front of the house to the bottom of the house to the top manager to the newest employee. We all shared depending on how many hours they put in.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I think that's an equitable. We do that at Big Wheel too. But
it's good, but it costs us money.
No, for sure.
To do that,
for sure.
Costs us employee taxes and
I think that's all part of it. I guess my concern, or sorry, the challenge is so that transition period where you're removing tips and increasing wages. So if you start increasing wages while they're still getting tips, then you're actually taking something away from them. So it's sort of like, the chicken and the egg, and what is the right sort of way to go about that,
Well, the best way, and we did a whole podcast on this, and we actually wrote a field guide on from that podcast on how to move forward with it. And basically the number one thing is it's all about communication with your whole staff. But I mean, obviously the most important people are the front of the house, because it's going to affect them the most.
Yeah.
So you have to start talking to them, in a good amount of time, and only you're going to know your staff well enough to know how to do it. But you have to tell them what your plan is, exactly what you want to do, why you want to do it, and how you're going to implement it, and in the time frame that it's going to happen. The back of the house is going to be like, yes, we're going to get more money, we're good.
Yeah.
And so it's easy for the back of the house.
Yeah.
And then when it comes to you just need to work with your bookkeeper or whoever does the books and figure out exactly what it is you need to raise your prices to. And you have to take into account the more personal, more corporate, more taxes, more accounting, because you're gonna have to put those onto the paychecks.
Yeah.
You have to. Insurance is going to be a little bit different depending on where you are. But the biggest thing is just getting people behind the idea of that you're going to be paid based off your experience, not off the whims of some weirdo who's in the dining room.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the bottom line. You're being paid by. I think it's a disservice to our staff. Like, if I have a waiter who's been with me for 5 years and they're an amazing seller, they know their wine, they know the menu inside and out, and we don't give them the respect that they deserve by giving them, a raise and expecting all of their monetary security to be based off the whim of somebody in the dining room.
Yeah.
I think it's unbelievably disrespectful.
Yeah.
And there's no other industry like it. Like, name another industry where it's based off of a tip, a legal industry.
Yeah.
Like, it just doesn't happen.
So how do we change the fact that, if I look at the customer base or the clientele, I think most of them would be happy to not pay a tip and to have a price adjustment. Back of house would just be stoked with anything.
Yep.
So how are we held hostage by one group of our collective here? Like, is it because I know back in the day when I was working in fine dining, there was servers making $400 a night in tips. That's unrealistic for any industry.
Yeah.
On top of their wage. Like, wage was never even part of their financial equation.
And they don't even cash their checks.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, $35,000 in tip outs at Araxi one New Year's.
Wow.
I'm like, well, okay, there's only 17 servers. Like, how much do we get in the back? So like, how do we change that whole model? Like, it's
the only people who complain about changing the model or who don't want to change the model are front of the house servers and managers who don't want to deal with the backlash.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's the restaurateurs who have to make the decision.
Yeah.
And if everybody made that decision to change, then it would just be what it is.
Yeah.
So the question I ask servers is like, do you think it's fair that you make $1,000 tonight and this cook makes 110 and maybe 150 with tip?
Yeah.
Do you think that that's a fair
split
amount of time? He's been here for 12 hours. You've been here for 6. Do you think that that's equitable? And in this day and age, when it's all about equity and equality, and it's a much easier sell today than it was in 1990 or even 2000 or even 5 years ago, because people want there to be fairness in the workplace, and it's completely unfair, and it's been unfair for years. And so that's the best answer to a server who thinks you shouldn't change it. And nobody wants to change if that's how they make the majority of their money. Nobody wants that to change. But this is the other thing that the people aren't talking about is the majority of people who don't want it to change aren't professional servers. They're just servers who are going to school, who are actors, or doing something else. And it's the people who are the owners and the cooks and the chefs who are actually the backbone of the restaurant. Yeah. Now the server is unbelievably important. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. They are the face of the restaurant, and it's extremely important that they're happy. But at the end of the day, they don't have the majority of them don't have as much skin in the game as everybody else in the equation, and they're the ones who are making out like bandits.
They barely even do their own dishes. I mean, they don't.
I mean, every cook and every chef has animosity towards the front of the house because of this disparity.
Yeah. Well, that creates tons of drama too, obviously.
Yeah, and
so if you cancel that out, if you cancel that disparity out, then maybe we all learn to get along.
Every big change, there's transition. I mean, ultimately, if you could just brainwash everybody and say you didn't ever get $400 a night, that never happened. No, then it would be a lot easier.
This is why right now it's a perfect example of why it should happen, because for the last year and a half, nobody's gotten $400 a night.
Yeah, that's right.
Nobody.
Yeah,
but if they were all making $20 an hour, they'd at least be able to survive through this, right? As opposed to depending on those tips that aren't coming in right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's a double-edged sword. I mean, you're making minimum wage plus you're not getting tips now. You're really getting a hit by asking to do the same or similar, even more dangerous work, obviously, because of COVID.
Right.
It's fascinating.
And the other thing, there's another aspect of it too that nobody at all is talking about, is that the CRA is going to go.
Yeah.
So the hospitality industry was the biggest voice out there saying that we're gonna perish without help from the government, and that's one of the it was the restaurant industry that really pushed CERB along to make it get to all the employees.
Yeah.
So CRA is going to come back when this is all over and say, okay, we want our cut now.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
nobody's talking about that. It's like the billions of dollars in undeclared tips that everybody just sort of doesn't think about or doesn't talk about. That's all going to change massively.
Well, that was
to think that.
Yeah, sorry, that was a big part of my argument with my staff was like, wait for the government to come back and want their money back, and this is going to put everyone on the map again. I mean, someone's got to pay for CERB, and it's going to be taxes that are going to pay for it, and where are they going to get them? They're going to come hunting for them.
Could you not? Sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead. No,
because this came to me. Could you not create a situation where you're paying fair wages and living wages to your staff, still kept the tip component on it, but made it equitable where it's like everybody gets it? So if somebody still wants a tip, they can still tip if they want. Your business model is built so that you can actually make money. And if somebody wants to just donate, just make the parity amongst, and we did that at Zambri's where we tip out, we ask our servers to tip out to the kitchen was way more equitable. And even the servers agreed. They saw that. And we made a few small changes where we didn't tip out on the booze sales, but tipped out on the food sales. So the servers got the booze sales because they were the ones pumping that, but then increase the equity on the food sale side for the kitchen staff. And everybody seemed pretty happy with that. Because I mean, my biggest fear in any of this is, if you don't do it right and you aren't able to make it happen, you almost need a government intervention in order to do it, in order to really do it. But I still think there could be a hybrid way where you just create a business model that you can pay your people well, create an equitable tip portion where everybody's getting an equal share, and then everybody should be happy in that model. And people, if they do still want to tip, they can still do that. And eventually, maybe the tips go down, but you're making it up on the wage side as a transition. I don't know.
It's a tough one. Like I said, there's 14,000 business models out there that we're trying to put into one whole, right? And that's where the difficulty lies. It works for Zambri's because you have servers who have been around for a long time and who are unbelievably professional. I mean, Zambri's is one of my favorite restaurants in Canada, if not the world. So I've eaten there many times, and well, it's amazing. Anyway, that's the thing is like there's not a lot of restaurants that are like that. So it works because number one, you guys, the server staff are mature enough to understand what's going on. You have people who have been there and who are the ownership on the floor, and with Peter in the kitchen, I mean, that makes a massive difference too, because the people who are the actual stakeholders are actually there day in, day out. Yeah. Majority of restaurants out there aren't like that.
No, that's a very good point. Yeah. So, I mean, ultimately it's challenging, and it's, but I think it starts with just, wanting to change and the conversations that we're having, I think. And tell us about your podcast a bit, Robert. Give it a plug.
Sure. Yeah. So it's called Mise en Place, the Cooks Camp podcast. It was we started at the beginning of 2020, January 2020, before COVID hit, and it was all a precursor to Cooks Camp. And every episode was going to be sort of trying to talk about things that we were going to be talking about at Cooks Camp and trying to make the cook's life better through different aspects of the hospitality industry. And it sort of morphed through COVID to try to help chefs get through it and cooks get through it and the hospitality industry get through it, and then trying to come up with different ideas to make our industry better. And it was very successful for a little tiny podcast. We thought it did quite well. We did 9 episodes. We had lots of people who were listening to it, lots of comments and stuff. So we decided for the second season that we wanted to do something a little bit different, in that we would do the audio version, we'd do a video version as well, and then we'd produce something called a field guide along with it that would be an actual call to action. And it was actually listening to the talk that you guys had the Bread and Butter Club the first time I was part of that Zoom call. It was you guys' ability to, or wanting to share so much information with each other. I thought it was unbelievable. I was like, that's what it's all about. It's about
Yeah.
sharing that information, because too many times in this, as a restaurateur, I've been a restaurateur since 2006, just trying to figure out what is the right amount of, how much should I be changing, how much should I be charging, and how much should my rent be versus my sales, and all these questions that you're sort of embarrassed to ask because you should know because you're a restaurateur, but you don't. So you try to figure it out, and then you don't really figure it out, and then you end up paying, charging $5 for a pork sandwich that you should have been charging $7 for, and you've left thousands of dollars on the table, and you didn't really realize it because your ego got in the way of getting advice from people who know.
Well, the lack of willingness to share too, I think, or where's the platform to do it? I think
that's right.
One of the things that I'm most inspired about our group is it doesn't matter how, like, I could think I'm the best business person in the world, and as it applies to restaurants, and I could say that, but even in this collective, and I'm not saying I am the best, but I thought I had a good base of knowledge, but I learned so much with this collective, and it surprised me actually, and it actually didn't surprise me. It affirmed what I thought would happen, is that we'd be sharing ideas, and whether it become to like sharing business plans or cash flows or just those things, like you should not be paying more than 8% of your revenue in rent, period, all in. Yeah. And some people are paying 10 to 12%. That 4% makes a difference between making 1% or making 5% or 5% to 10%. Like, these things are super important pieces of information, but like you said, people aren't talking about it. It's like, oh, well, that's good information. It's like, you can maybe Google it, but unless you see it in real world, right?
Well, that was the whole idea. Is like, these field guides were like, we want to come up with real world, sort of a step-by-step guide on how to change things that are fundamentally wrong in our industry. So we came up with 10 ideas that we thought we needed to change. And the first episode was the no tipping model. So we did an actual, like, this is how you change the no tipping model within your own individual restaurant. And we gave a step-by-step. We're doing the second podcast actually tomorrow, and we're talking about living wage. Oh. It's like, how do we move to a living wage? And it's these fundamental problems that have been plaguing our industry the entire time I've been in it. And this is sort of, we want to figure out a way to give people real world information, like what you guys are doing, sharing it, but actually just putting it out there. It's a PDF format. It's on the Chef's Table website, and it's for anybody to download at any time. And they can they can take it and print it off, or just send it to a restaurant friend or whatever, and utilize it as they see fit, and hopefully people dig it. And
well, let's do some more collaborations too. Let's figure out how we can further propel and move this movement forward, because I think it's groups like ours and what you're doing in the podcast and the sharing of information is the first step, because that's going to then access to the information's always been a barrier for change. So I think that part's, let's do that. David, do you have any closing remarks?
Yeah. Well, I just think, I'm really inspired by what's going on, and I can only think that it's going to be so beneficial for students to come out into some of these businesses that are talking about it. And even before it, here at the college, if we start talking about these things to a bigger degree, maybe that's where the change starts to happen is we actually talk about things and have people going into industry knowing what they need out of it as well.
Yes.
So I'm pretty stoked.
Yeah, I think it's I'm inspired just having this conversation.
I know. They say talk is cheap, but I don't think so. I think having conversations like this is how things change. I mean, I've spent quite a bit of time trying not to talk about tips. Yeah. And this weekend, in the past week, I've listened to a lot of information brought to me by podcasts by Robert and other people that I've been listening to, and it really has made me want to now talk more about tips. I know I've been the big poo-pooer of tip conversations at the Bread and Butter
Collective, way to go, man.
But I think maybe there's a space for it.
Well, we're going to figure it out, and I think with these conversations will help.
Yeah. It really does.
Can you imagine the turnout? We'll need a stadium.
Yeah, that's a stadium for sure. They'll all be our staff going, "What the hell are you doing?"
It'd be all Cliff saying, "I told you so."
Yeah,
I
Cliff.
told
Well,
you
yeah,
so.
Philippi, one of our members, does it. So,
Yeah.
and he's happy with his decisions around that. So, I definitely think people fear change, but in life, anything, change is not to be feared. It should be embraced, and you can always adapt. Like nothing's set in stone. So, I can't imagine it not working if you're paying your employees well. Like
That's exactly it.
You know,
if you have happy employees, they're going to stay, and
Yeah.
you're going to have a good. You can have a good business.
yeah, exactly.
The only thing that will fuck it up is another restaurateur going, "Oh, I know I can undercut them," or
Yeah,
Right.
and that's the problem. That's the fundamental problem. We can't do that anymore.
But you can't fight with each other, and you have to bring value. You have to give more compelling reasons for people to come to your business other than price or service or even food quality. Like you've got to sell a better message, and that messaging is on us, right? So it's our job to give good messaging, and I personally believe, elevating your staff and elevating your community is the best way to tell a story that doesn't relate to what you're actually doing. Like, I don't care if I'm serving burgers or pizza or steak. Like, tell your story and be proud of it. And don't apologize for paying people well, and don't apologize for charging what you need to charge.
Don't apologize ever.
Don't apologize. Well, I mean, that's
what?
I think
would
there's
love
some politicians
to
that have that model, so we don't want to do that. We do want to recognize when we make mistakes, okay? And we'll own them and we'll apologize for them. We won't gaslight.
Being part of groups and big conversations like this, it makes me really understand what I don't know, and something that I would love to hear one day, not right now maybe, but is there a formula? What's the mathematics between trying to figure out how much more we need to charge for a dish so that we can pay our employees X amount of money?
Gross profit. You got your wages and your cost of goods. So that number, the gross profit number, pays for everything else, including your profit. So if your fixed costs are at 20% and your labor's at 30% and your cost of goods is at 30%, then you should theoretically make 20% profit, right? So you could actually increase your labor to 35%, and now you're making 15%. So people do it at the bottom and they work their way up, but you got to start on the top and work your way down.
I'm going to have you sit down and work that math out with me on paper so I can visualize it. That's the.
I mean, if your gross profit is 28% and your overhead is 28%, you make zero. So that's where most gross profits need to be over 30% to make any type of profit. But so it gives you just two things to focus on: your labor and your cost of goods.
Right. Okay.
As long as you're not paying too much in overhead, or you haven't invested, $10 million to create a business that generates $1 million, then you should be okay.
So the easy answer to my question is pay your people more, see what that costs, and then increase your prices so that cost still balances out.
Yeah,
to
you
about
still end up with
30%.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think I'm going to go do this right now. I think after a coffee break.
Guys, thank you for your time today.
Yeah.
This was really, we're going to do this again because there's so much more I wanted to ask and talk about. And definitely check out Robert's podcast for sure. I think that's very valuable. And David, keep doing what you're doing. It's essential that we have good staff with passion. We'll do our job and make sure we can pay them well and treat them well, okay?
Yeah.
So
then it'll be no problem for me.
Well, you keep pointing them to us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for your time.
All right.
That was awesome.
Thanks. It was great being here.
Yeah,
Thank you,
cheers.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Robert.
Good to see you, Robert. Bye-bye.
Wow, that could have gone on forever.
Oh, my God.
Man.
I was like, we're not even close. I didn't even get all the answers to my questions I wanted to ask.
I know, and we're both missing our next.
Yeah, we have
we
have a bread and butter collective meeting right now that we're late for.
This does feel like it was more important to get that information.
Well, I just think it's such a beautiful experience to be, talking with your peers about real problems and real challenges, like honestly, and not trying to sugarcoat it or say anything. And the one thing about both David and Robert are very outspoken and they speak their minds.
Right, they sure
And
do.
I think that's what it's going to take in order to really affect change here. And that's what I'm excited about. I mean, it's like there's so much passion that we've got and we do put in a restaurant, but to be able to put it into a group of people that are like-minded and trying to change an industry.
Right, and they're changing it in such a positive way. I mean, they're both educators in their own way, right? Some directly educating, the others through leadership and mentorship. And they both seem so positive about what's going on. It's great. I look forward to hearing more from them, and I look forward to the people that they're producing for our industry in the future.
Yeah, I mean, like we're gonna have another podcast with both those gentlemen again for sure, because I really wanted to find out the decision making process that he went in to close Camosun.
Right.
Right
Big
at
choice for
COVID.
him.
Yeah, big. I mean, that was around for 12 years, a couple locations. But obviously time was a restraint, but we'll hopefully do that again. But definitely check out his podcast because he is an industry leader in BC.
Yeah, Mise en Place. It's a great
Yeah.
podcast. Speaking of great, let's talk about all our members for the Bread and Butter Collective because they are all great. We're going to start today with 2% Jazz and Agrius and Bodega and Big Wheel and Nourish Whoop Whoop and Charlotte the Quail and Drum Roaster Coffee and Habit and Foo and the Culinary Classroom and Cafe Fantastico.
Filippi, Harold Street Brew Works. Sorry, I don't have my glasses on again.
And
Hey Happy, Hoyne, La Pasta, House of Botang, Part and Parcel, Poco, Prima Strata Pizzeria, Roast, Table 9 Consulting, Sherwood Coffee and Bar, The Drake, Tapa Bar, Taco Stand, El Pastor, Took, and Zambres.
What a bunch of great people. The House of Botang came through for me on my wife's birthday for dessert.
Oh,
Just
fantastic.
this last week.
Castro does an amazing job over there.
Sure was. And they were closed. They were just closing up. And I rolled in there and they stayed open and helped me out.
Oh,
Thank you.
service at its best.
I didn't tip.
Ah, cheap. All right. Well, thank you for listening. You can check out our more information about the Bread and Butter Collective at breadandbuttercollective.com. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
Please give us all the stars.
Give us all the stars, 5 stars, nothing less. And we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Be
Thank
nice.
you, Sam.
Thank you,
Be
Calen.
kind.